It is General Manager Week here at Locked On Predators, and today we wrestle with one of the biggest decisions Barry Trotz has to make. Who is going to be Nashville's goaltender?
You're Locked On Predators, your daily podcast on the Nashville Predators, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Predators podcast, and thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are your free daily Nashville Predators podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Want to kick off this episode, of course, with a shout out to our Locked On Pred heads. Those are our everyday listeners who tune in to talk Nashville Predators hockey with us. We thank you for your support, and we love that we get to spend just a little bit of your day with you. I am Ann Kimmel. I'm a writer at Penalty Box Radio, and I have a partner in crime.
I'm Emma Lingen. I'm the Nashville Predators site editor and reporter for the Hockey News.
That's right. On today's show, Emma and I are doing the hard, heavy lifting. It's been General Manager Week on Locked On Preds. We've talked about veterans. We've talked about who are we signing, who are UFAs. We've talked some with Eric Dene yesterday about who in Milwaukee could jump up to the roster. Today, Emma and I are going to talk about what in the world does Nashville do when it comes to goaltending. This is like the big conversation, the big job in front of Barry Trotz. So we're going to dive into that. It's going to be super stressful and fun, but we're going to muddle through it. Before we dive into it though, do want to let you know today's episode's brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Before we dive into the whole Juuse Saros, Yaroslav Askarov, Kevin Lankinen, quicksand, Emma, you and I got to spend some time yesterday with another very well-loved Nashville Predators goaltender, did we not?
We did. A guy, you may have heard of him by the name of Pekka Rinne.
He is like 6 feet 5 inches of delightful. He really is just so delightful.
He's just human sunshine. I love him. Like even the way, and people wonder maybe if that's just how he is, like, you know, forward facing to the media or whatever. That's just literally his personality. He's even one of those people, like he texts with like multiple exclamation points like that. It's just how he is all the time. It's amazing.
I love that. He's his new-ish role. He's a scout development coach for the Nashville Predators. Yesterday, came back. They're kind of sorting through and sifting through the draft and prospects and all of that. But he was surprised, which was so precious. It was announced that he is going to be an inductee into the Tennessee Sports Hall of Fame. And it was, you know what? He is so beloved by Nashville Predators fans. It's almost fun to watch how almost embarrassed he is, or not embarrassed, but just I wonder sometimes if he understands just how much we love him. I mean, the statue should be a clue, but he's just so beloved. So that was really fun. He was surprised by it, and I loved, you know, I just love seeing his reaction.
Yeah, it's very sweet. He is just so pure. Like,
just is.
I tweeted about this. I tweeted about it today, but it happened a few months ago. Probably one of my favorite things that has ever happened to me was when I was in Bridgestone Arena. It was a game night. It was the last time they had their scout meetings back in January. So Pekka was here and he was sitting next to me in the press box for a game. And he had to go somewhere to do like a TV interview or something like that. And he had to ask me for directions on how to get somewhere in Bridgestone Arena. And I was like, you know, there's a statue of you right outside. There. Like, and you're asking me where to go. So I was like, oh, Pekka, don't ever change.
He is so precious. Lots of other great goaltending options in the Nashville Predators organization as well. But the question that we're going to wrestle with today is what to do with who we have. And As we dive into this conversation, we put it off till the end of the week because I personally find this a little bit stressful because despite the fact that there are people in the Nashville media who say, hey, there are 3 options and 2 of them are no good. This is a no-brainer. I feel like, Emma, and tell me if you see it the same way or if you see it differently, but it feels like there is a lot to unpack when you look at who should be in net next season for the Nashville Predators, who should be in net 2 seasons from now, 3 seasons from now, because you pull at one thread and there's a lot that untangles with it. So for me, this is a little bit more complicated than I think people want to assume that it is.
Yeah, I think and we even talked about this earlier today that if you're going to talk about any of the options here in net, you really can't talk about any one of them in a vacuum. Like there's so many things and so many outside factors and how they relate to each other and just all these different little nuances and things. It's not black and white. So I understand why you wanted to put this one off because it's not an easy one to tackle for sure.
It's not. So we're going to do this, like Emma said, we're going to kind of do it talking about potential goaltending duos moving forward. So let's start with one that we're very familiar with. Let's say Nashville Predators decide to go with Juuse Saros and Kevin Lankinen for 1 more year. That would involve either re-signing Juuse Saros or maybe not re-signing him. He could potentially be moved at the trade deadline, and re-signing Kevin Lankinen. Kevin Lankinen is one of the UFAs that Barry Trotz needs to make a decision on. So let's talk about a potential continuation of the Saros Lankinen magic that we have, Emma. When you think about that, what are some of the pros and cons of continuing with Kevin Lankinen and Juuse Saros, and how would you see that logistically making sense or moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, the pros are pretty, we have now 2 seasons of proof that it works, and I think that, the one outstanding piece is that Kevin Lankinen is currently not signed beyond this past season, and so this would involve re-signing him, and that he was making $2 million last year. Imagine if you want to re-sign him, you've got to offer him more than that, maybe 2.5, maybe 3. I don't know if the Predators want to spend that much on a backup goaltender, but that I would say kind of feeds into what I would say the biggest issue I have had with the Saros Lankinen duo, which is that I think Saros starts too many games. He is the most overworked goaltender, just statistically over the last 3 years. He does not need to be starting that many games when your backup is Kevin Lankinen, who has been thrown into these crazy situations. Like it was something like, I don't even remember, at least like 3/4 of his starts this year were on the road and against playoff teams, and he won at least like half of them. So, I mean, there's also a lot to be said, I think, for Lankinen and his ability to go so long between starts and still be so sharp and so on his game, because a lot of guys can't do that. Like again, being able to go into those situations, road game against a playoff team, a lot of goaltenders, backup goaltenders, would not thrive in that situation, and he does. And so I think that that's huge. Now, again, you'd love to have him back just for that reason alone. If you have him back, I would like to see him start some more games. He only started 24 games or played in 24 games this past season. He needs to be playing at least 30, in my opinion. Saros doesn't need to be working that hard.
Yeah.
But, I know there's interest from Barry Trotz and the Predators. I know they would like to have him back, but again, the price would have to be right. And, it's well known that Lankinen has higher aspirations. He wants to be a starting goaltender, and he knows he's not going to be that here. And so if he does want to go the free agent route, and I mean, if he wants to test the market rather than re-sign with Nashville, there's plenty of teams out there that need a starting goaltender, but it depends probably on what's going to be most important to him, because what if he gets offered the full-time starter role and a lot of money, but it's with San Jose? Like, maybe
Right.
that's not going to be great for his stats next year. It's not going to be, it's not going to be enjoyable, I wouldn't think. Like, he might prefer to continue being a backup on a more competitive team like the Predators, get to stay with Juuse Saros, get to keep working with Ben Vanderklok, and kind of stick with what's familiar. But yeah, I think I would love to see him come back. To me, that's the dream scenario, is Saros and Lankinen again next year in Nashville. But it would have to be at the right price, and I would like to see him start some more games.
I agree with that 100%. And I said at the trade deadline, when Lankinen didn't go somewhere else, which I personally, just on a personal level, was happy to have him here. All of those GMs should sit there in their wrongness and be wrong.
Yeah.
Because I think we're seeing in these playoffs, goaltending does matter. Edmonton has swapped out Stuart Skinner. Colorado has maybe not had as much success with Georgiev. And I'm like, you could have had Kevin Lankinen, who, even though, like you said, didn't have a ton of starts to show off his body of work, is somebody that could win playoff games.
Yeah. I mean, maybe that was part of the Predators' strategy, is like, well, we're just never going to let him play, so no one can see how good he is, and then we'll hang on to him.
Yeah. Oh, Barry Trotz, you sneaky devil. I love that. I think there's a lot of upside to keeping these two. I think so much of it hinges on what do you do long-term with Juuse Saros. But I'm with you. Like, for me, I like Saros Lankinen. I think, goaltending matters. And this is just a better team with Juuse Saros on the roster and Juuse Saros in net. And Kevin Lankinen is about as good a backup goaltender as you're going to find in the league right now. So I think there's a lot of upside to doing this a little bit longer if you can. And that, I think, turns into the question, if you can. Coming up, we're going to discuss another option that could potentially happen in Nashville in net. Talk about the pros and cons of Juuse Saros with young Yaroslav Askarov as a backup. We're going to talk about that. First, want to let you know that this episode is brought to you by our great friends at FanDuel. It is winner take all time in the NBA and the NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home that big win all of your own. If you've been watching these playoffs, but you just haven't gotten in on the action yet, now is the time to check out FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 that you can bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. So go and check it all out. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. Coming up on tomorrow's show, we are going to talk about a couple of interesting and fun off-ice updates with some Nashville Predators players, and we're going to dive into a variety of topics on a fun Friday episode. But we are wrestling with the big thoughts and the big wrestling points that Barry Trotz is going to have to deal with. We're talking about goaltending. So Saros Lankinen, we've talked about some pros and cons of just kind of continuing with that for a period of time. Let's talk about Juuse Saros and bringing up Yaroslav Askarov as the backup. And for me, Emma, I kind of look at this as that Rene Saros development path 2.0, where you have this veteran who spends a lot of time in net, and then you have a younger backup goaltender kind of developing. And for me, I think there's a lot of upside to doing this. It gives Yaroslav Askarov a little bit of breathing room where he's not thrown into the fire in the NHL. He's going to be learning from Juuse Saros, who I think, this is a, top third goaltender in the entire league. I think a lot of teams would love to have Saros. Yaroslav Askarov is young. People who are like, throw him in, make him the starter. My gosh, he can barely drink, y'all. He can barely drink.
Well, he is Russian, so we don't know. But
Well, that's true.
but yes.
Legally in
Legally.
the United States. You're right. We need to put a little asterisk on that. So there's a lot of upside, I think, and this one may be a comfort choice because, like I said, Nashville has seen this kind of development path work in the past. What is your take on, if Lankinen moves on next season, it's the Saros and Askarov show? And for you, how long term can that duo go? What are the financial problems with it? Do you see any red flags as far as development for Askarov?
Yeah, I mean, Askarov is kind of he's like the wild card in this whole thing, right? Because we don't
Right.
really know. I mean, to your point, of anyone who's saying, and I know there are a lot of people who are saying, like, or at least were saying around the trade deadline this last year, like, get rid of Saros, we can get a lot for him. Trade Saros, bring up Askarov. That is the literal worst thing you could do, because the last thing you want to do is rush a guy out of the AHL into the NHL before he's ready, especially a goaltender. And
Yes.
I do not think that Yaroslav Askarov is ready. He's not. And not to say that he's not ready to get a few NHL starts. I mean, he's already had 2 NHL starts under his belt, and he won the last one in a shootout, which is
Yes.
great, but that's such a small sample size. And you see the highlight reels, and you see the fun personality that he brings, and you see the fire that he has and the compete that he has, and no one is questioning his skill as a
Right.
goaltender. But what is the question is his maturity, and his ability to handle adversity. I mean, if you're looking right now, obviously in Milwaukee, it's the second year in a row that he has lost his starter's net in the playoffs. Now, from a prospect development standpoint, that doesn't concern me. I don't think that that is detrimental to his development.
Mhm.
What does concern me, though, for purposes of this conversation, is that tells me that he does not have the maturity or the ability to handle adversity. I mean, we saw what happened. I don't remember which game it was, against Texas in the first round of the
Yes,
Calder Cup playoffs, when he tackled a guy.
he
Let's
did.
I know people got all fired up and love that from him, but you can't do that in the NHL, or
No.
you get lumped with guys like Jordan Binnington, and I don't think anybody wants that. So,
No.
um I think that tells me, I think, again, skill wise, he's not, that's not a question. Skill wise, he could be in the NHL right now.
Mhm.
But if we're just there's so much more that goes beyond just the raw talent and the raw skill into making an NHL goaltender. And I think that Saros has it. I think Lankinen has it. I do not think Askarov has it yet.
Yeah.
And I mean, to me, again, it would be, if the Predators are going to keep starting Saros at the rate that they are, which I've already said that they shouldn't, but if you're going to have Askarov as your backup next year and only give him 23, 24 starts,
Yes.
that's a huge waste of that skill that we're talking about. It's going to be more beneficial to him to be a starting goaltender in the AHL. I know that's not what people want to hear. That may not be what he wants to hear, but I think that it's going to be a lot more beneficial for him. The one option that might be kind of a combination of scenario 1 and scenario 2 here would be, you re-sign Lankinen for a year. Maybe Lankinen, Lankinen's a trade chip at the deadline. Maybe he goes
Right.
somewhere at the trade deadline or before, but probably around the deadline. And then at that point in the season, a little over halfway through, then you bring Askarov up to be Juuse Saros' backup. that kind of timeline to me makes a lot more sense, and I would be more comfortable with that than I would with just bringing him in as Saros backup right off the bat next season.
Right. And I think you have to remember too, we talked about Askarov is only 21 years old. Juuse Saros didn't take over the starting job till he was like 24, 25.
Mhm.
So there is a lot of growth. I mean, let's just talk about the frontal lobe development that happens in a male in his early 20s. But, that's a whole other podcast.
Let's just say that the development that does not happen for a male in his early 20s.
There we go. I mean, that's a whole other podcast. But I do think that rushing Askarov is not beneficial for anybody. While it may be more entertaining for Nashville Predators fans to see him in net sooner, I love what Barry Trotz said. You can't over marinate a goaltender. Yeah. And I think that's really important. You can't over marinate him. And if you are going to bring him up and Saros is going to start 66, 67 games, you are missing minutes of experience with Askarov. So I agree with you. The hitch in the giddy up for me with all of these scenarios that involve Juuse Saros is how long and how much money do you tie up in Juuse Saros? Because this is like his year to get that contract. It's his year to kind of get the big one. So that there's going to be money involved. I look at Connor Hellebuck's contract was it $8.5 million for 7 years? I think it's right around in there. Very similar stats with Juuse Saros, very similar as far as like importance to the team. Does that cancel out Askarov's development? Are you going to waste years and are you going to miss an opportunity? Because Saros and Askarov are probably two of your biggest pieces if you want to make a move for some other position. So I think it becomes this really thing. The main downside for like Saros Askarov is how does it work long term for me? And did you just give up or tie up two pieces in one decision where you're not going to be able to go out and get that, mysterious invisible 1C that we need?
So this is where my suggestion that a lot of people probably are not going to care for comes in, is that I would much rather entertain the prospect of trading Yaroslav Askarov than I would trading Juuse Saros. I think he's incredibly valuable. He's a valuable trade chip. And we even know that Barry Trotz kind of dangled him out there at the trade deadline last year. That was probably more just for show to see what he could get in return. But I mean, I think that to me, because more people are going to be more interested in, this is where Askarov's age is a benefit because he is so young. They want a guy who they can rely on for longer. He's a guy that, now, again, I'm not saying, trade him like just for anything. Trade him for a bucket of pucks. No, I'm saying if you can get a legit 1C or, couple first round picks, or if you can get a really good return, I'm taking that phone call for sure. The problem with Saros is that I think you could get a reasonable return for Askarov right now. I still think anyone who's on the trade Saros train is vastly undervaluing what he's going to demand in terms of a return. And so as far as extending Saros long term, which I think, well, not just I think, I mean, Barry Trotz has said that remains their priority, that they want to extend him and they want him to be here longer. I don't know that because yes, if you're looking at comparisons around the league, Hellebuck is the obvious one, right? And so he got, like you said, it was like $8.5 million for 7 years. That's hard because I look at everything relatively speaking. So who else on the Predators roster makes $8.5 million? Philip Forsberg. And so and Barry Trotz came in and said that the days of those big, long contracts are over, basically. And so you have to wonder, does that like, does that apply to Juuse Saros as well? Or, was he just talking about forwards? Like, we're not going to
Right.
pay guys like Matt Duchene and Ryan Johansson anymore. Like, it's hard. You don't know. I certainly think that Juuse Saros is more valuable to this team than either Ryan Johansson or Matt Duchene. But I don't know. I think, UC's agent is probably going to be like, yeah, we want exactly what Hellebuck got. And that's
Right.
reasonable. But you have to wonder, like, how close are they, or how willing are they to maybe kind of come to any kind of compromise? Like, maybe you're still paying him $8 million a year or $8.5 million a year, but it's only for 5 years or something like that.
Right.
You don't know what's reasonable for both parties. Like, I don't know. This is just pure speculation on my part. So I guess that's my roundabout way of saying signing Saros should be the priority, and it is the priority. But I would be surprised if he got the kind of term that Hellebuck got. I could see him getting the AAV that Hellebuck got, but I would be surprised if he was signed for 7 years. That seems very long in the Barry Trotz era.
Yeah. Yeah. Coming up, we're going to keep kind of talking about this Juuse Saros trade sign thing. And we're also going to look at the one scenario where Juuse Saros isn't on the Nashville Predators roster. We're going to talk about, what does that really cost Nashville? We're going to dive into that coming up here in just a minute. First, want to let you know today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Those of us in Nashville, we know how exciting playoff hockey can be. But if you are interested in getting a taste of the live action of an NBA postseason game, you need to check out Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip off. So there are some great deals available. With those killer last minute deals, all in prices, views from your seats, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. And friends, it is not just NBA games or sports. Game Time has the fastest and easiest way to get tickets to your favorite concert, comedy show, or musical. I know it may not apply to a lot of our listening audience, but I just saw Frozen musical at TPAC and it was fantastic. And you can get tickets on Game Time if you want to take your favorite little Elsa and go see that. Game Time has great last minute deals. You can save even more with their flash deals. It also shows you the all-in price, so there is no surprise when it comes time to check out. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code Locked On NHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. All right, we've done a lot of the hard work all week long. Tomorrow, Emma and I are just going to have some fun on Friday. We are going to talk about a couple of fun off-ice Predators news bits, and then we're going to just real quick hit on a couple of different questions floating around among the fan base. Is there a free agent we might want to talk about from Toronto that people have speculated on? Perhaps. But before we dive into the Mitch Marner situation, let's talk about, you're talking about Juuse Saros and signing him. And I love what you're saying about term, because I don't think it's money. I think Juuse Saros is worth $8.5 million. This is a better team with Juuse Saros on it. Whether you are rebuilding, retooling, whatever you want to call it, this is a better team. And when you look at what the team wants to do in the next 3 to 5 years, you're looking at a lot of young forwards that they have in Milwaukee who are going to need to come up. You're going to look at some turnover on the blue line, and that may involve some younger players coming up. To have Juuse Saros in net in that scenario is worth $8.5 million to me.
He's your safety net.
Better team. Yes.
He's your safety net. I mean, we saw what happened In the 2022-23 season, when everyone either got injured or traded, and
yeah.
it was basically an AHL roster that was, still competitive down the stretch. And why?
Juuse
Juuse
Saros.
Saros. Like
That's
that,
right.
he's your safety net. And like, yes, he is coming off what was statistically his worst year this past season, but I think there's so much that goes into that. And we've talked about this before about like, it's about, the players, the guys in front of him are learning a completely new system,
Right.
and that changes the way that he sees the game. It doesn't change the way that he plays his own position, but it changes the way that he sees the guys in front of him, and he's got to kind of relearn or retool his brain for like what to expect. And so like it took everyone had to like took time to adjust to this system, and that includes him. And I think, yes, he's coming off his worst year, but he's still like, I cannot overstate how valuable he is to this team.
Yes.
And I think Barry Trotz said it when he first took over as GM. It's like, if you want to build a championship team, you start in the crease and you build out from there. And so
Right.
I think the Predators are already in such a good position with that, because they're done with that. Like, they've got their crease all figured out. And so
Right.
I think that, again, going back to the term conversation, if you're looking at the Predators' window to win a Stanley Cup, like, we know we can be realistic and say like they're not trying to make a run at the cup next year, like in
Correct.
2025. But in like 2027, 28 might be kind of the time frame that we're looking at. If you can get Saros signed to a deal that takes you through, then, that could be a 5-year deal, maybe
Yep.
a 6-year deal, but I just don't see him signing for 7 years. His contract that he's on right now that expires after next season is a 4-year contract. So he is going to want maybe more than that, but he's 4 years older. So
Right.
I could see him, I would love to see him. I think like you said, he's worth $8.5 million for sure.
Yes.
I just don't know that he's going to get $8.5 million for 7 years. $8.5 million for 5 years, we could talk about it for
I
sure.
think, yeah, and I think that's a deal Barry Trotz would make. That's a
I,
deal I
I
would
do too.
sleep well at night with, because
Yeah,
that gives you solid goaltending through a transition. That gives you time to develop Askarov at a pace that is going to be long-term good for him. And the Predators, in the meanwhile, are still going to be a better team with Saros in net.
100%.
But then you have the people, and Emma, let's talk about this. Then you have the people that say, why would you keep him when you can trade him? And then that would leave you with, let's talk about this goaltending potential, Kevin Lankinen with Yaroslav Askarov. Now, full disclosure, and you and I, you know this, and I'm sure our listeners remember, Kevin Lankinen is one of my favorite people to talk to. And whenever his NHL career is done, he needs to be a life coach or write a book, because when I get done talking to him, I'm like the Kool-Aid man who wants to run through a brick wall. I
Yeah.
find him so interesting, inspiring, focused. The way that he goes about his work is just fascinating to me. And I think he's such a good goaltender, underrated across the league, because we just don't see him that much. But if you did trade Saros, if Barry Trotz got the deal of a lifetime and that involved Juuse Saros, and you had to go with Kevin Lankinen and Yaroslav Askarov, how do you feel about that moving forward?
I mean, how are we defining moving forward? We saying like long
Great
term,
question.
or
Great question. Yeah. Great. I
like,
mean, what do you think would be, when you look at a time frame without Juuse Saros, what does that look like for you?
a lot of this comes back, like I said, it comes back to Askarov's timeline, and when
Right.
is he going to be ready? Because again, skill wise, he's already there. He's been there for a while, frankly. but he clearly is not, he doesn't have everything all together. So I think like if you had a situation where Juuse Saros was gone before the start of the season and you re-sign Kevin Lane, this seems extremely unlikely. So I feel even weird like talking about this
Throwing it out
hypothetical.
there.
I'm like, ew, what am I saying? But hey, you never know.
We've heard wilder things about
It's
goaltending.
true.
I am sure anything you say will not be the wildest thing put out
That's
there.
true. Yeah, no, I'm trying to maintain some semblance of logic here, but it's hard. I think if you somehow ended up with Kevin Lankinen under contract, but not Juuse Saros, and then you have Askarov coming up. I mean, if you want to prioritize Askarov as your future, the future of your franchise, if that's the direction that you're trying to go, I think that you would probably be wanting to lean towards making him the starter, giving him more, more
Right.
minutes, more time, which makes sense. But he and Lankinen maybe could platoon it for a little bit and just kind of split it pretty evenly. So you're not throwing him right in. Again, this is a very weird hypothetical for me to even talk about because I haven't really even thought about this. But yeah, I would say maybe like ease him in. You kind of do a 1A, 1B.
1A, 1B.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know, man. I think so much of this comes down, and this is where I have the most trouble with this debate. So much of it comes down to so many factors, and each one is important. What do the Nashville Predators need to be successful in the postseason? I feel like despite what I think we're hearing, and I think this has been a change, people have said you don't have to have great goaltending to win in the playoffs. I would argue that you probably do. Especially Nashville, who doesn't have yet that 1C, that superstar, that Connor McDavid yet type player,
Right.
But then it comes down to money and term with Juuse Saros and development of Yaroslav Askarov. And what is the gap between Askarov and when he really is NHL ready? And you can't, like you said at the very beginning, Emma, you cannot look at this situation in a vacuum. You have so many options to weigh.
Yeah. And that's
God
why
bless Barry Trotz, man.
Yeah. This is why, the answer is we have no answer. And
That's right.
end of show. See you tomorrow.
The answer is technically it's really not Emma and my job. Even though it's GM week, Barry Trotz, this is on you. Best of luck. And just to kind of summarize this, and you hit on this earlier, and I think it's important to reiterate, Barry Trotz has said it's a priority to him to re-sign Juuse Saros. We'll see if that is posturing. We'll see if that's what really happens. But it sounds like you and I agree that Juuse Saros is important to the Nashville Predators moving forward.
Yes. And I think that the Predators will not be able to like realistically get the kind of return that they would seek for him in a trade right now.
Yes.
Again, not trying to get into the Mitch Marner discussion yet, but I think that realistically we know, I know that Barry Trotz is going to set the asking price extraordinarily high for Saros. Right. And I don't know that anyone is willing to match that right now. So yeah, we'll just have to see.
Yeah. Well, those are our thoughts on goaltending in the Nashville Predators. Y'all, it's muddy water. If you want to jump in, leave us a comment. You can tweet the podcast at LO_Predators. In the meanwhile, Emma, where can everybody find you on social media and your work?
Can find me at Emma_Lingen. It's LINGAN. I get a lot of really fun variations of that spelling. So just so everyone knows. And then you can find my work online at the Hockey News.
All right. And I'm Ann Kimmel at Ann K, had to think about it, _Mama on Ice. And you can find my work at Penalty Box Radio. Of course, Emma and I will be back tomorrow with a fun Friday episode. We're going to dive into a handful of topics, wrapping up GM week. Hope you all have a fantastic Thursday. We will see you tomorrow.